Welcome, I am Cesar Iliano, Content Director for BNamericas, the must-have Latin American business intelligence platform for thousands of professionals working in the region's key industries. Today, we will be presenting our vision for the electric power sector, looking into the Capex plans for the more important operators in Latin America. Our annual Capex report is already in our platform, and BNamericas clients will see there the investment plans for the main companies operating in the region and how they compare to 2021 figures. I will be presenting the main consolidated numbers, and then we will have the chance to listen to our energy team talking about the main opportunities and risks for the industry in the coming months. So let me show you some figures here. The electric power sector is in the midst of an investment boom as the post-pandemic recovery gathers pace. 20 of the largest power companies with a presence in the region, for whom year-on-year comparisons are available, have set aside 57.08 billion in combined capital investments, up from 48.2 billion last year. In percentage terms, the companies with the most sizable year-on-year increases in planned capital expenditure among those that have made their figures public are Mexican state company CFE, Energisa, and Canadian Solar. A major share of this expenditure will be directed towards projects that are aligned with the region's clean energy transition. Some 80% of respondents to a BNamericas Electric Power survey published last year said investments in decarbonization efforts would either grow or remain steady in the ensuing 12 months. But that only tells one part of the story. Perhaps even more revealing is that solar power was identified by 68% of those surveyed last year as the fastest growing electricity generation source, followed by wind with a 17% and natural gas combined cycle with a 10%. As I said before, all the details of these companies' plans are available in our annual Capex report. But let's now go to our discussion panel. Michael Place, BNamericas Regional Energy Editor, Joao Montenegro, our energy correspondent in Brazil, and Cristobal Riego, our energy correspondent in Mexico, will be sharing their vision with us for the main markets in Latin America. Please, Cristobal, Joao, Michael, open your cameras. Okay, thank you very much for joining me. Let's go directly into it. Let's start with Michael, who's based in Medellin, Colombia. Good morning. Mike, we've been hearing a lot about Colombia's efforts to accelerate its clean energy transition. I was reading today that the country's renewable generation increased 25 times from 2018 to 2022. So in that scenario, I was wondering which companies would you say are leading this shift and what type of projects are they investing in?
Good morning, Cesar. Yes, exactly. We have the energy transition really is accelerating in Colombia, especially over the last 1 or 2 years with auctions, public auctions, private auctions, and some of the companies that are leading this shift. Well, I guess the major company is Enel, which has an alliance with Grupo Energía de Bogotá, and the company has announced that it plans to have installed capacity of more than 5,000 megawatts by 2024, and to do that, it's going to invest more than $3 billion over the next 2 years. So some of the major projects for Enel are the Wind Peshi farm in La Guajira department, which is the largest wind project in the country of 200 megawatts currently under construction. We also have the Guayepo 1 and 2 wind farms, and also La Loma, the La Loma project as well, located in the north of the country. Another company investing heavily in renewables is Celsia, which has outlined plans for $1 billion in capital investments this year, also with a strong emphasis on renewables. And also EPM, the public utility company in Medellin, which has forecast 2022 investments of $2.18 billion, up from $1.8 billion last year. So EPM is going to prioritize work in renewables, but also in the Hydro Ituango Dam project, which we all know has has been long delayed. It's more than 4 years behind schedule, and it has cost overruns of more than 1.5 billion US dollars. So that's a priority for EPM. It's a big concern for EPM as well. But that's kind of an overall picture of where the electric power sector is in Colombia at the moment.
Yeah, thanks. And let's now move to what will be happening this year in Colombia with the political scenario. Colombians are choosing a new president this year. How do you think this election process will affect the sector?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. Unlike oil and gas, where the candidates have vastly different proposals, electric power shouldn't be impacted too much. The leftist candidate, Gustavo Petro, who's leading the polls, he actually has plans to attract private investment in electric power, particularly in renewables. His idea is to accelerate the transition towards clean energy and really promote solar and wind, and also initiatives such as battery storage and hydrogen as well. So interestingly enough, although investors are looking at Petro with caution, he actually could, be of benefit to the electric power sector, investors in the electric power sector, because his idea is to really accelerate that transition. In terms of the other major candidate, Federico Gutierrez, he's being viewed as somebody who will probably maintain the status quo, given that his ideologies are very similar to the current administration.
Yeah, all right. Thanks for your vision and outlook in Colombia. Let's now go to Brazil, where Joao Montenegro is our energy correspondent. Good morning, Joao. So we know one big event for the industry this year is the process to privatize Eletrobras, which we know will have a huge impact in the whole industry. So what are the prospects you see for that process?
Good morning, Cesar. Thank you for the question. So this process is drawing attention from all investors. Of course, Eletrobras is Brazil's main electric power holding, and with a huge installed capacity. And the government intends to open the market, as it is doing in several segments of the electric power sector, by privatizing it through a capitalization process where it will dilute its shares to up to 45% at the most. But the thing is, the Federal Audit Court in Brazil is still analyzing this process, and some of the judges, the ministers, have identified problems with the valuation of the assets of the company. So, and we are getting more near and near to closer to the presidential elections, which will take place in October. And there's a lot of political pressure against coming from opposition parties against the privatization, and it's an electoral year, so it's some investors or some market analysts already see potential difficulties for the conclusion of this operation. And if it's not concluded before the elections, and in the case the current administration, Bolsonaro, does not win the election, he loses to Lula, for example, the privatization process is likely, it's very likely that it will not happen, because Lula has already positioned himself against the privatization of Eletrobras, as he is against, for example, Petrobras privatization and other strategic companies being privatized. And the current government, for example, studies a possible privatization of Petrobras in a possible second Bolsonaro term. So, and meanwhile, in terms of Capex, Eletrobras plans to invest around 5 billion reais this year. It's approximately $1 billion. And I've recently shown BNamericas readers how the investments made by Eletrobras have sharply fallen in the last decade. It's important to say that during the PT governments, if on one hand Eletrobras had a greater Capex, it had been registering very poor financial results. Since Michel Temer in 2017, it has posted positive results. But on the other side is that Eletrobras has decreased significantly its Capex. So, and this is one of the main reasons why the government wants to privatize the company, because according to the economy ministry, Eletrobras should be investing around 15 billion reais per year in order to keep its relevance in the Brazilian sector. So that's what the Brazilian government hopes to achieve by privatizing the company.
Okay, great. That's great. A huge number. As our audience may know, we have in BNamericas a huge database for projects for the whole Latin America region. We are focusing heavily in Brazil now, as we are seeing, especially in the electric power sector, these growth trends. But what would you say are the energy sources that will be growing the most in Brazil in the next months or years, and what does that imply for the country's grid?
Well, definitely renewable energy sources, mainly in terms of wind and PV, photovoltaic solar power. These sources are increasing a lot, and mostly in the northeast region of the country, because it's where we have like more winds and higher sun levels, and this is of course changing how the Brazilian grid looks like, because the Brazilian matrix has always been mostly based on hydroelectric power, and the main reservoirs, hydroelectric reservoirs, are concentrated in the southeast. So now that we have been growing more in the northeast, this will demand very high investments in transmission capacity and substations, and also modernizing, retrofitting the existing ones. So this is going to require lots of investments. And meanwhile, distributed generation is also growing a lot in Brazil. So we are going through from a very centralized power grid to a decentralized one, which will require these transmission investments and other technologies to enable to rationalize and optimize the system.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, Joao. Cristobal, good morning. You have been explaining to our clients for the past months what might happen or what could happen in Mexico's electric power industry with the reform proposals and all the legal actions that have been going on in the last year. It looks like now we are in a kind of different scenario. The Congress decided to block the energy reform proposed by AMLO's administration. So I wanted to ask you, what do you think the industry is standing now? Does this create any hope for private investors, particularly developers of renewable energy sources?
Sure. Hi, Cesar. So let me say for a start that we are not in the best case scenario of what could happen with both reforms, but we are certainly not in the worst case scenario either. So the reform, the constitutional reform, it was most likely wasn't going to pass because the government needed 2/3 in both chambers of Congress, which it had neither. So it was very difficult. And then we had the Supreme Court ruling regarding the legal reform to the electric power law. And there, the best case scenario was that 8 of the judges were going to strike down the reform, and they didn't get there. We got 7 to strike down the reform, but not 8. And that means the reform remains, but also those affected, companies, civil society organizations, they retain the legal power to issue injunctions and protect themselves against the changes that are unconstitutional. So that leaves us in a space very similar to the one we've been for the past 3 years, where the constitution will remain as is. So there are constitutional guarantees to protect the electric power sector from too much intervention. But on the other hand, the intervention of the regulatory bodies and the intervention of the permitting process, and those will remain. And the government will do everything in its power to extra legally interrupt, stop the advancement of private projects. So what I would say is the silver lining of this process is that all the institutions will remain in place so that the future government can very easily sort of revive the sector. the CRE and CNH and SENACE and all of these institutions will still exist because they are still in the constitution. The possibility of doing open actions is still there for any future government. So that's the positive side. In terms of the investment climate and how it affects the opportunities, I would say that the three areas we have seen growth over the past 3 years are the same that are going to continue, with the exception that CFE is doing a very strong ramp up of investment ahead of the 2024 presidential elections. So they have a strong pressure to show that they have moved forward with the several projects that their flagship initiatives. So we are seeing that now very strongly with 6 large combined cycle projects totaling about 4.5 gigawatts. Those have been awarded and are going to start construction soon. And then a series of other projects, as well as the overhaul of its hydroelectric capacity. We will see a strong movement in that area. And then in terms of the private sector, we see very strong signals in distributed generation. Distributed generation is the sector that has seen the least amount of intervention and its growth beyond any forecast that were in place. So we expect to see strong growth there. Those are small projects below 500 kilowatts. And then the other thing that I think is relevant is Mexico still has a very strong sort of legacy pipeline of renewable projects that were in place before these changes in the market occurred, both through the auctions and the open market. And there we continue to see some projects moving forward. Some recent analysis have shown that Mexico could even fulfill its 35% renewables target by 2024 only by allowing these projects to move forward. And so I think it will be very important what happens when some of these large projects are ready to connect. Some of them are in testing, and whether SENACE and CFE sort of put any interruptions or any hurdles for their connection, or whether they are able to connect smoothly, which would be a signal, I think, for other project developers to move forward with some of the projects, those that can get financing, because some of them have financing issues.
Okay, great. That's great, Cristobal. Let's go south for a little bit. We have a change in government here in Chile. I know you are in contact. You've been covering the Chile electric power sector for some time now too. So what would you say are the priorities for the electric power industry in Chile here now?
Sorry, I lost you there for a second, Cesar. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. So I was saying, okay. Let's go south to Chile for a little bit. Cristobal, there has been a change in government here in Chile in March. What would you say are the priorities for the industry here for the coming months?
Sure. So the government appointed a sort of very moderate representatives in key positions in the finance ministry and in the energy ministry. We had sort of very competent people appointed. And so I think what the government will face is Chile has seen a stellar growth of renewables over the past few years. Last year was a record year. And so I think the government will be measured against that. The issue is whether they can keep the momentum going despite all of the other uncertainties that are sort of in the air. And especially I would point to the Constitutional Convention, which now is sort of garnering a lot of attention. There's a lot of areas in the economy that are at stake there and are being modified. And so whatever comes out of that process and what happens in September in the election will be crucial. Another key aspect is whether the government, or with what conviction and strength, the government decides to continue the long-term policies of the past two governments. For example, the green hydrogen strategy. For example, the storage strategy, the flexibility strategy. Some of these reforms are very sort of perceived as very pro-market. And so even though they, in a way, they benefit the whole economy. So I think it will be key whether the new administration at the Energy Ministry decides to push strongly for this, to continue these processes, or whether they are sort of slowed down through, I don't know, citizen consultations and other kinds of processes. I think there, in those two aspects, we will see whether the sector can keep the very strong momentum it's been seeing over the past 5 years.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you again, Cristobal, Joao, Michael, for giving us your vision on the sector. It has been a very good conversation. So to our audience, please, our clients, get into our platform and click on report sections to read and download our Capex report. For those of you who are not BNamericas clients, visit BNamericas.com and take a look at the great content we publish every day, covering not only the electric power sector, but also oil and gas, mining, infrastructure, and water and waste sectors, as long as the political risk coverage. So again, thank you very much. It has been a pleasure. Have a nice day.